look at this image. This is an image on my computer. This is an image of a nose growing out of a man's forehead. And it's there on purpose, obviously. The man's nose was damaged in a car accident. So to grow it back, scientists put a skin expander into his head, molded the shape of a nose, and propped it up with a bit of cartilage from his ribs. Jacqueline, I was astounded to see this, if only because, like, did they have to put it on the most prominent part of his body? Couldn't they put it on his hip?
I know. Well, the really interesting thing is if, you show this photo to a surgeon, they'll kind of look at it like we do this all the time. The only difference is that right now the nose is being created on the forehead, and normally this procedure will be, done right where your nose is supposed to be. And they would do the same thing as what we're watching on the forehead, kind of reconstruct the cartilage and reconstruct the nose there. The reason why it's on the forehead in this case, and in other cases, a team would take the skin from your forehead and basically transfer it or use it where your nose is supposed to be. But here, it seems like there was an infection, and I guess the surgeons had a concern with the blood flow, and so they decided to reconstruct the nose on the forehead like they would in any other situation, but instead use that skin there because, again, it's facial skin and very similar to the skin that you normally see with your nose. So that's why it's the forehead. But again, it's normally done right there where your nose is supposed to be. So it's an interesting situation.
I mean, I think we all remember the images of the mouse with a human ear on its back. Do you remember that? Where, I mean, again, if we're talking about prosthetic limbs, I guess this is the flip side of the same conversation, which is that, yes, one way of replacing body parts is to create very complicated prostheses out of robotic prostheses. The other is to actually just mimic the human body's own capacity for regeneration. And Jenny, I wonder whether you have any thoughts about when you see things like this. It sort of makes me think of stem cells and a future in which perhaps we're able to actually grow human organs and human body parts either on ourselves or in a lab to replace ourselves.
Right, and that's not actually the future. That's happening today. In fact, this spring, Cornell was able to effectively build an ear. They printed a mold for cartilage cells and collagen cells and grew a very realistic-looking ear inside it. Other labs are working on noses, and they're actually working on printing the cartilage and the live cells directly. So we're not that far away from a future where we're going to have these replacement body parts.
I mean, the thing about a nose is obviously it's a pretty simple piece of equipment. I mean, there's not a lot to it apart from cartilage and skin. Once you start talking about things like the liver or the kidney, let alone the brain or something, it becomes a lot more difficult to grow. But Phil, I mean, the pace of research here. I've got the image of the ear on the mouse, by the way. There it is. The pace here is going so quickly. I don't think it's going to be terribly long before we are able to make increasingly complicated parts of our body.
Absolutely. I think one of the things about this image is that it is so striking that when people see a nose on a forehead, they just think that they basically put some like nose miracle grow there and it grew on its own. But really, I mean, the technology already is more advanced than that, like she was saying. And I think it's just a matter of time till we can get more and more complex. And I mean, it's just 3 years, 5 years away until that could really be a 3D printed nose that somebody puts on.
Yeah.
Real nose.
Does it remind you of anything in the natural world? I mean, as a conservationist, are there animals that are able to, obviously there are some reptiles, right, that can regenerate tails or can even regenerate body parts voluntarily. Does it remind you of that?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately for a lot of arthropods, things with exoskeletons, they can molt. And so let's say you're missing an arm. If you molt the next time, you can kind of grow a little bit of that back and then molt again and grow a little bit more of that back. So with them, it still is a gradual process, and they luckily have the hardware to do it. So we don't naturally have the ability to grow back a nose. We've got to get a little bit more creative with our science.
Yes, we have our brains to rely on rather than nature. We have our brains to force out, to figure out innovative ways to do what other species can do without thinking about it.